This episode of Conversations with a Wounded Healer contains the harsh realities of depression and suicide. Please listen with care. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. So a meditation student asks his teacher, "Am I allowed to send you email?" "Yes," replied the teacher, "but no attachments, please." Ba-dum-bum-tsh. Haha, just wanted to give you a little joke at the beginning of this commercial for Scott Tusa's Coming to Chicago. I've told you about it before, but I'll tell you again. Friday, October 26th from 6 to 8 p.m. There'll be a Dharma talk with a $20 suggested donation. And then on Saturday, October 27th, a half-day meditation intensive for $75 or $95 if you want CEU. So please visit my website at www.headhearttherapy.com and you can find more information to purchase tickets and hopefully you can join us that weekend. So again, that is October 26th and 27th. We look forward to seeing you. Today's guest is a good friend of mine who I met through my therapist. I seem to meet a lot of wonderful people who are 6 degrees separated from Susan Lipschutz. So VersAnnette Blackman, she says she is passionate, creative, and a visionary with scrappy resilience. Her life's motto is, "A broken wing doesn't mean that you can't fly." So please enjoy my interview with VersAnnette. Hi, VersAnnette.
Hey, Sarah. How are you?
I'm a little crazy right now, but that's okay. What's
Girl,
new?
Crazy.
Right? I mean, who says they're fine or good anymore? They're liars.
Totally. I definitely don't. I used to go out of my way to say, I'm good. I'm great. Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're actually fine or good, you're not paying attention because there's a lot of shit going on.
There's a lot of shit going on right now, and it freaks me out so much. I'm like, how do you jumble all of that into one word that sums up how you're doing in a moment?
Crazy.
I can't really do it. Crazy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because crazy's not bad.
It's not.
It's just truth.
That's all it is. And truth is one of those things. I'm like, yeah, truth. Maybe that should be my answer when somebody asks me how I'm doing. You want truth?
Right.
Or do you want me to, yeah.
Do you have space for reality or no?
Do you have a moment? Because I could just tell you, I'm really struggling right now with a whole bunch of things. Can you help me?
Right. And they're like, nope. You're like, okay,
nope.
next.
Right.
Well, before we go off into oblivion, as I know we will, how about you tell people who you are and what you do?
All right. So I'm an artist, an author, a speaker, and a facilitator. Also a mom and a wife to 5 teenagers, blended family, my husband
Ooh, girl.
and I. Yeah. So my youngest 2 will be 18 and 20 this year. So I'm entering a season in my life where finally I think it's all about me. So those are all the roles. I run a business. It's called Soul Revival Healing Arts, and I sell original art. I've done a lot of exhibits in the community all over Chicagoland. Also, I am an author who published her first poetry collection. It's called Butterfly Spirit. God, the title's so long. Butterfly Spirit, Poems of Transparency, Transformation, and Truth. And so I am an artist and a healer and someone who really believes that art has such a tremendous capacity to heal. And I've learned that through my own life. So, that's who I am and what I do on so many levels. And I mean, I've got a lot of titles. I'm also a licensed massage therapist. So I'm an everyday medicine woman. Braving the world right now. Yay!
Yay!
Yeah.
So could you, if it's possible, because you are so many things at the same time and everything sounds like it's kind of coming to an apex for you now, but can you kind of weave for us what your journey was and how you arrived here?
Absolutely. So I was born a creative girl way back in the 70s. I always had so much imagination. I think I had way more imagination than anything else. It was having that active imagination, being surrounded by books and creativity. My dad was an artist, first artist I ever met, actually, completely gifted on so many levels. He could draw, he could sing, I mean, he could dance. And my mom was also pretty creative. She's got a real nurturing spirit. She made sure that we had all the books in the house. So I was the kid who spent my free time hanging out on the couch, looking up at the ceiling, pretending that the ceiling was actually the floor. I read books. Yeah, I read books from Time magazine to encyclopedia. I was always drawing and I was always dreaming. And so I'm a nature lover and artist and creative. And it took me until I was in my late 30s to actually realize that I am an artist. It's okay to give myself that title. And I'd spent a lot of time in service jobs, basically from customer service to retail. I mean, I've worked pretty much everywhere and I've gone to a lot of schools. And the things I was most drawn to were psychology. I'm so fascinated by people's behavior and why we do what we do. Definitely a philosophy geek. I like to have deep conversations all the time.
Same.
Same. Yeah, it's just my way of connecting. It's the best way to like really get to know who I am by listening to what other people have to say. So I'm really into insight and meshing that with creativity and also helping other people overcome the same traumas that I've faced in my life. And that, my love, is a numerous list. First, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. There's one thing that, I think most people and organizations that I've worked with are aware of that because I'm a survivor turned advocate. But I spent about 5.5 years actually working for a literary arts organization that's based in Evanston, and we did book groups. We went into a lot of the underserved communities where there were at-risk youth, and we replaced one of their English classes simply by bringing literature to them and giving them books that they would then see themselves in and inviting them to have conversations about it. And so that job right there was one of the first jobs that I had that I knew I was made for. I knew that I was created for that. And so it was one of the most rewarding jobs I've ever had. It was also really draining for me because empathy. Yeah, empathy is one of my top 5 strengths on the Strengths Finder. So being in those classrooms with those youth, I mean, it was young men and women between the ages of as young as 11 all the way to like 20, 22. And so going in there armed with a book, a poetry prompt, some art, and just being willing to have authentic and honest conversations with them and asking them what they think was the thing that reminded me that, I'm actually the grown-up version of these teenagers from Chicago surviving trauma, and we need each other. So that was my journey. That was the first job that I had, and I learned so much about how a nonprofit works and fundraising, and when you're wanting to do great work in the community, you got to have a team. So from there, I actually left a couple of years ago and started my own business. That's where I'm at.
So talk a little bit about what your business encapsulates. Soul Healing Arts, is that the...
Soul Revival.
Soul Revival.
I remember starting my business and I was really caught up on the name. I love to name things. I'm super wordy and, the writer in me is always like, what are we going to call this thing? So Soul Revival was born out of me realizing that I didn't just want to be a service provider in terms of creativity and healing. I wanted to also claim my own art and my own creativity just because it's something that I needed. I didn't realize that for a long time. I worked so many jobs and I was always the best greeter, the best customer service person. I was always someone who was super ambitious. It was very easy for me to help other people and forget about myself. And so it was the year that I actually graduated from massage therapy school. So I left my full-time gig. The first thing I wanted to do when I left my gig actually was start my own nonprofit to take the same kind of programming, but just my own stuff to domestic violence shelters. And that was really exciting. I mean, I'm an independent worker, so I'm one of those people who has a hard time sometimes not being the leader.
Same. I forgot how much we're sisters.
Yes. Oh my God. I haven't forgot. I know, right? I'm like, Oh my God. Okay, so I'm bossy, and I take initiative. I'm like,
Right.
so this is the problem. Who's going to do something? Okay, I'm doing it.
Yep.
So that's what I did. I like jumped out of a full-time job, and I knew that I'd already created so many connections that I could do exactly what I wanted to do, but I needed help. But let me tell you, I was quickly worn out by all the things that go into a nonprofit, from fundraising and
Yeah.
all the administrative stuff. And I was like, okay, I have no money now. I'm unemployed technically. How am I actually going to start a nonprofit? It's a little, it's too much for me. And so it was during that sort of intersection where I was like, okay, so I do want to help people. Nonprofit, that's a complicated way for me because you're always going to be subjected to funding.
Yep.
And I was like, why am I not, and I've had a lot of great mentor women in my life who they would say to me, okay, so, if you do a nonprofit, at best, you're only going to be making this much, and you're going to spend a lot of time making friends with people, and you may not always like them, but and I was like, I'm way too, look, I'm a direct communicator, so I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, we're too honest for fake friends.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I can't really.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Plus, I had a family and a husband who's worked to provide for us. But I'm like, let's be realistic. I'm like, we got to eat, right? So it was a couple of months after that transition from a full-time gig, and I went to an art retreat in North Carolina. And it was life-changing, let me tell you. I spent 4 days with some amazing women from all around the world, just learning how to do art. But it was an intuitive-based approach, which I had already been on that kick just from like researching and finding people online. I'm like, oh my God, I like what she's doing. Okay, let me try this way. Let me try that way. Workshop was life-changing. It was at Donna Downey Studios in Huntersville, North Carolina. And I'll never forget how I was in there and I was the only Black girl in that room. I'll never forget that. But we would all gather together and have food and we would chat over art. And you know how it is. Anytime you're doing anything creative, you're like, let me see what you're making. All right, let me see what you're making. I made so many gorgeous friends. Oh my God. So they called me Chicago. Because that's how, like, where are you from? I'm from North Carolina. Where are you from? I'm Chicago. Chicago, what you doing over there? I'm like, hey, girl, how was your night? This is what I'm doing. I was always the last artist to leave the studio with a couple of other junkies. And I came home that weekend and the thing about the beauty of that particular art workshop was that, first of all, it was super affordable. I was pretty much broke because I was getting, I think, unemployment and, we were struggling. And I could do a payment plan. And I was able to use money that I had already raised for my own organization to take myself on an artist retreat, which it made a lot of sense to me. I was like, this is why I've done the work that I'm doing, because I'm always going to want to help other people. But if I don't refill up my own well, if I don't refill the well in my heart, it's a done deal.
And it's interesting that you talked about, the work that you did and how, because you're so empathetic, it was hard. And I was in Canada over this past weekend spending time with Gabor Mate, and he talked about compassion fatigue is not because we've been giving too much compassion to others. It's because we've not been giving enough compassion to ourselves.
So true. Oh, that's one of those things that's just like, oh, yes. It's spot on. I
really came away this weekend from this whole thing recognizing that, sometimes I feel self-conscious about the amount of self-care and healing work that I do for myself. But when I came away this weekend, I was like, no, it's because I do that then I'm able to share with other people. And my journey has to be the most important, not because, my clients are less important than me or my staff is less important than me, but I cannot be the best version of myself. I cannot be a healer, a helper, a therapist, a mentor, a boss, unless I am working towards my best self.
Yep.
So it's almost like the helping work that I do now, I'm trying to frame it in this way that it's like it's this super positive byproduct of my own work.
I mean, the thing about when I think about a super positive byproduct, it's so, it's so hard for me to just think of the work that we do in those frame in a frame that way, because it's like what we put out into the world is good because it's not always positive. And yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
that has been so hard for me to embrace. But I think art was the one thing that really helped me to embrace that, because it
Mm,
was the place where I could always go and just start putting some paint down. I would scribble my anger out or whatever issues I was dealing with at my life.
mm,
At that time, I was like, you know what? I don't know what else to do. Go make something.
mm,
Let me write in my journal, let me scribble. And these are things that always bring us back to the center and the whys of our work. So
mm-hmm.
we are always bringing out the most positive byproducts, I think, without even, I think it's intentional, but it also feels unintentional sometimes too for me in
Yeah.
my journey. Yeah, yeah. It's the honesty. It's the honesty part that's like, I'm pretty authentic, but I'm also super transparent.
Right. Right.
It's hard for me to fake when it's
Totally.
not who I am. So yeah.
Yeah, and I just can't. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, the I think as we have done our own healing work, at least for me, and what I'm also kind of hearing in your story as well, is that, the path was already laid out. And I'm not saying like, oh, God, God has a plan for us and we're supposed to do everything that God says. Not like that.
No. Yeah.
But because we have begun to align with our higher selves, our true nature, the path just kind of falls into place. And I say that recognizing that it might sound like, oh, life's easy at that point. And I don't think that it's easy, but I think there is an ease to knowing which way I'm supposed to go. So I don't know if you resonate with that.
Very much so. That's the only ease that I
Yeah.
ever lean into. And, I do feel like there is a plan that God has specifically for me.
Mhm.
I do feel like I know exactly what my purpose is, and it is rooted in spirituality, though. I mean,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
grew up, and you can relate. We talked about this
Yeah.
as we were singing "This Little Light of Mine" in
Mm.
Todos Santos. Is that right?
Todos Santos, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like when you grow up in an uber religious family, you have to make really hard decisions about what religion is going to mean for you. And grew up in a Baptist church, it's a missionary Baptist church in Chicago. It's over 106 years old this year, actually. And so, that's a family tradition. But there's at some point I realized, I'm like, okay, I think that what I think God says is a little different, because this feels like judgment and
Right?
condemnation, and that makes me feel like I'm bad. And I was
Right.
really young understanding that. I was super young getting that part. And so
Mm.
for me, I call that grace, the grace to walk through so many traumatic events in your life, but also understand that there's the roots of the tree
Yeah.
and then there's the fruit of the tree. And so
Right.
you can go back and like take the best versions of what you've already been taught and let that be the foundation. So I'm like, yeah, this is the vision that is for my life. It's very much rooted in a deep love and spirituality that isn't about, separatism and, I'm better than you and we've got the answer and you don't, and you Americans and you Christians and I'm
Mhm.
so over that shit.
Mhm.
I can't even, I'm like, oh, you know what? Then the same God who loves me enough to understand that I'm going to use profanity. I'm like, I can
Right?
pray. I'm like, I think God already knows that about me. You're going to get angry sometimes.
I
Got
don't
to
think
learn
God
to,
gives a fuck what
you
I
know,
say as long as I say it with a happy heart, right?
it's, it really does matter what's in your heart. That is
Right.
so, so true. That's where the whole soul revival, that's where it was born. I didn't even know I was trying to come up with all these super fancy names. I was like, maybe I should call it soul flower healing art. And I was like, why do I have to be a flower?
Mhm. Mhm.
So soul revival. it was a playlist that I had, actually, the name of a playlist on Spotify. And my best friend called me up one day and we had been talking. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to name my business. I'm doing art. I just got my license for massage. I want to help people. I'm going to do this. I just wrote my book, and she's like, don't overthink it. That's what she says to me all the time. Don't overthink it. She knows me. I'm like, oh, I don't know. And then she called me one day and I said, girl, I'm over here listening to my Soul Revival playlist. And she was like, that's the name of your business right there.
Well, and the word revival to me, aside from the religious context of having a good old spiritual revival.
I know.
Right. The other thing that conjures for me is the base word of it, which is revive. And if I think about those of us who have been through trauma and those of us who continue to reinvent ourselves, there is a revival and a revision, a revisiting of ourselves in different forms. And so I do think revival is a beautiful word to talk about healing work.
It really is. And got a little complicated. I mean, my business was pretty much born in 2014, and then 2015 is when I was like, all right, how do I actually make a business and all the things? But there was a while where I wondered why I was the only artist who didn't name my business VersAnnette, Blackman, Bosia Art, or something like that. And I've just, I realized that, it's a weird sort of thing, the way I put a lot of work out into the world while understanding that it's not just about me, but whatever comes through that work will come through me. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, when you say revive in terms of like circling back and understanding that, you're gathering, you're always going to be gathering. In terms of creativity, it's funny that a lot of people, especially adults, don't feel like they're creative at all.
Right.
And I never felt that way. I'm like,
that's a shame. Sorry for you.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm sorry you feel that way. Like, how can I help you? You can do, and we'll talk about, I used to write poetry. I used to make art. And I'm like, you know what? Mm-hmm. So guess what? This is my soul revival, but you're welcome to come and find your own soul revival and healing through art. And that, that's an elevator pitch. I need to write that down because I forget sometimes.
Good thing that we're recording this, because you don't even have to write it down.
Awesome. See, technology saves me again.
Bam.
Yes.
Well, I'm realizing as we go through this, I usually kind of at the beginning start talking about how I know the guest, and I didn't even do that with you. We just launched into it. So, do you want to share a little bit about our adventure in Mexico?
Oh, of course. It's my favorite story, actually, from Mexico. So the funny thing that really cracks me up sometimes is that because of our friends at Tribe, Carrie, I think she had invited me to something in Chicago, and I don't remember what it was, but it was an event, and I remember looking at your face on something, and I was like, Head Heart Therapy. I love that title, and I think she's going to be one of my best friends.
I'm right. Yes.
And I don't know if I reached out to you or whatever, but then we're at the retreat, I think, maybe a year or so, months later. And so as soon as I saw you at the retreat, I was like, hi, oh my God. I remember when I saw you on something online and I was like, we're going to be best friends. And you were like, okay.
Okay, girl, let's go.
Let's go.
Yep.
And so that was an incredible retreat, first of all. So much about that. And that for me was the first time I had gotten my passport, first time I had actually traveled internationally outside of going on a cruise and sleeping on the land in a teepee right next to the ocean in the Gulf of girl. It was amazing.
Right.
And so one of the things that really cracks me up when I think about you is that we're very loud, super authoritative and bossy, super creative, and honest, just so honest. And sometimes it's a little much for people. Just you know what? And I was like, let's have some one-on-one time before we leave. And I just remember you were all tatted up just like me. You had funky hair and style. And you would wake up and be like, hey, good morning. What's up? And we cried together. We sang together.
Yep.
our time together on the beach. We talked about our childhoods and all the
Oof.
things that we want to do in the world. That was like the point of healing. And to sit there right next to the waves on the ocean, and it was just us opening our hearts. I was like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was right. She is my friend. This is my sister. So
Yep.
I don't know if it was the last night of the retreat, but I just remember that Susan made us sing.
Yeah.
So we had our ceremonial ritual, white clothing,
Yes.
and we walked to have that fire.
Yes.
You and I were holding hands, and we sang "This Little Light of Mine." And I was like, "Girl, you sing? We need to have a band." I mean, it
Uh-huh.
was so, and I remember leaning in because your voice was so much stronger than mine. And I was like, I'm leaning in to keep the tones and the melody because you got me.
Mm.
And we stood there holding hands, singing. And then Susan made me pray. So, come on, put a prayer out for the
Mm.
children. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, here we go. This is,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember that night. It was so beautiful. And we had done so much spiritual work. And then that night also, just as the fire was going down, a couple of us stayed out. And I picked up a drum. I can't even remember whose drum it was.
Hmm.
Must have been Jessica Huff, who was doing our
Oh,
yoga.
yep.
She had that drum. And I remember hitting that drum. And I was like, oh my God. This is like calling up my own African roots, actually. I was like, I need to
Mm.
have my own drum. That trip gave me so much to help me overcome fear that I've had about not being able to swim, being close to the ocean,
Mm.
all the things. Understanding that my best friends are already in the wellness industry. We're healers, we're
Mm-hmm.
therapists, we're artists, we're nurses, we're doctors, we're social workers. I mean, this is what we do. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a life-changing trip for me. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm very jealous of your memory. You have a really good memory. I usually walk away from any experience not remembering details, but remembering just how I felt. And I just
Okay.
remember feeling so much love with you and
Mhm.
for you and that, like, God, I mean, that was right after my parents, that was literally right after my mom died. That was only 3 months after. And so I think I was in this emotional, just broken place, but then
Yep.
at the same time I don't remember details anyway. So I'm glad to like relive all this through you, because it's been, it's in the recesses somewhere.
Yeah.
I really wish I could take song lyrics out of my head and put other important things
Mm.
like this in there, because I can
Yep.
read that shit off an iPad now.
Yeah. It's funny how people always say that my memory is just so, like, you have a really great memory. And I can't even begin to explain to you how. Like, so I could literally put something down, get up the next minute, and I'm like, what happened to this? And
Mm-hmm.
I can be super scatterbrained, like so much. But I think there's something that works really well when it's about connection and
Mm.
when it's really coming from a place of love. I get a visual. It's hard to explain, but I can see. But like as I'm recounting that story and thinking about our connection and how it started, I'm like, I could see us there on the beach. I could see us when we
Mm-hmm.
went for
Mm-hmm.
hikes and the fire and the drum and all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what helps me to translate everything into some form of visual storytelling,
Yeah.
because I'm a storyteller. I'm always going to be telling stories. So, I mean, song lyrics, look, I'm like, do you want to start a band? Because, like,
No, I'm trying to get lyrics out of my head.
all right, then,
I
look,
love it. I
I
love it.
got you.
Let's lean into the question about being a healer, because
Mm,
you've already said that a couple times, in our
hmm
interview here. So when you think about the work that you do, who you are, and the title of healer, how does that fit or not fit for you?
So, healer has been super complicated for me. It depends on, where I am in my own life. And so it's interesting that you brought up the fact that when we were sitting out on the sand that day, that your mom had just passed away. So you were grieving. And grief is one of those complicated things that I've never fully understood
Mm-hmm.
until I just lost my brother a year ago to suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And he was only 32 years old. And he took his life in my mom's bathroom while I was in New York on my way to an art show. So the level of helplessness,
Yeah.
indescribable. Indescribable. And so thinking about brokenness, and also how does a healer deal with brokenness? The only thing I've ever known tell the truth about how you feel. You know, I was fortunate to be able to speak with him just a couple of days before he actually took his life, and I knew he wasn't well. And so my mom had called me and she said, you know, I need you to talk to your brother because I think he's not doing well. And it's funny that I don't have a degree, but I'm pretty much the therapist in my family who was like, we need you to talk to our girlfriends. You need to talk to your niece, your nephew. And I'm like, hey.
Who's going to pay me for this?
Who's right? Why? Like, why am I working for free if I've already survived the family? So, you know, one of the last things that I did last year in my business, and this is where I got stuck, was I released a collection called This Is Grace. And it was all about me exploring my own grief and understanding that if anything is actually going to sustain me right now with all this pain and everything else I've already gone through, it has to be grace, you know, and not the kind of grace that I can give to myself or anybody else, but it's grace that'll sustain me until I get through this. So it's been complicated because that led to so many other domino effect things in my life. Like it literally, you know, I'm also lost my brother to suicide, had to circle back, take care of the family, raising, you know, 5 teenagers who you know, being married, making sure that my business stays afloat, all of that. It led to a psychotic break in December. And so in the winter, I knew I was exhausted, but I kept trying to go on because I got this show and I got to do this and trying to hold on to all the roles. So that was when I think I lost faith in myself as being a healer. So I was like, you know what? I think that maybe I'm not. Maybe this isn't soul revival healing arts. Maybe it's just art. It's too complex for me to even think about me being some sort of superior God. I'm like, no, I'm a believer. But sometimes when you say healer, it denotes a superiority. So it's like, oh, you're a healer, but you smoke cigarettes. Oh, you're a healer, so you don't eat green this and you're not trying to save the planet. Oh, you're a healer. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Does that mean that I'm supposed to be perfect? Because there's no such thing. So, you know, this is the thing I love about Susan's work is everyday medicine woman. Modern medicine woman. So maybe the medicine is what brings healing to me. And sometimes the medicine is the last thing you want to deal with.
Yep.
Own shit. you know, and so I'm like, creativity for me is medicine because it's the only thing that I know that brings me back to a place of freedom and helps me to embrace all the ugly stuff that I don't want to look at. I'm like, you know, I still got to deal with it. So I am a healer. I know that. I just took me a long time. This last 6 months of my life has just been so, it's been a journey, Sarah, let me tell you. It's been a journey.
I want to go back to what you said about there being kind of an essence of superiority with the word healer, because a lot of people have really pushed that word away. And I think that's the assumption, right? Is that, you know, I am healing you versus I am a vessel, a conduit, you know, whatever. But that's it. Superiority. That's really what I think the fear is. Either we're perceiving ourselves in that superior light or others are putting that on us. And that comes down to power, right? Who holds the power? Yeah.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Who holds the power?
And I think that's especially salient given all the shit that's going on in the world and specifically our country.
Yep. And what's funny is that I've always tried my best to shy away from politics and religion in terms of any sort of debate or any difficult conversation, because I know it's a great entry point for offense. Yeah. And right. I'm like, I don't know if you really want to know how I feel or how I think, and I'm not going to put myself in a box. But ultimately, I've learned this the hard way. First of all, I actually am super interested in politics, super interested in studying more about religion, world religion, and I actually love sports. So I've defied a lot of stereotypes by being myself. Yes, girl, I used to play basketball in grammar school. I didn't even remember that shit, which is so funny. I'm like, yeah, my memories. My mom had to remind me recently. She's like, remember I used to play basketball? And I was like, oh my God. I forgot. And because, I get super jazzed when it's the playoff season. I'm like literally standing in front of the TV and acting like I'm on the team. Clearly not an athlete, but
Ah.
like I love sports actually. I've been looking at those three areas lately a lot and just wondering like, what is the thing with power dynamics? Like, what's really going on here? You
Mm-hmm.
know what my most basic answer is? That this is a revelation I just had this morning. All boils down to money,
Yeah.
unfortunately. For some
Which is
people,
power.
I'm so conflicted on accepting that as it trips me up every time. Because I'm like, is money power? Because I thought knowledge was power. And isn't wisdom, like what, we
Well,
all on the
true
same channel.
power, but I
Mm,
think when we're talking about what's going on in the country
in
right
the
now,
country. Oh,
it's
yeah.
fueled by fear and scarcity about not having enough resources, i.e., money. And if you have resources, i.e., money, you have the power in our society. And you and I think probably everybody listening to this podcast agrees that knowledge is power, connection is power, authenticity is power, but
Hmm.
that doesn't get us paid.
No, it
And
doesn't.
I find it increasingly hard to live the life that I want to live and reconcile with the way everybody else is living their life. And
Yeah.
I don't want to be like us and them, right? Because I'm
No,
trying to, but I think there's a large faction of people who are motivated mostly by success and money from a, financial standpoint. And I can't
I,
live that way.
I can't either. I can't. And it's using the word faction brings me right back to what I love most about Brene Brown is that she tells her story in such a way that is like it's her. It's her voice, it's her work, and that's it. And so one of the things that really helped me understand what I was struggling with was to go back and like I'd already read Braving the Wilderness, but I went and downloaded it
Yeah.
on Audible.
Yeah.
It's like factions. That's it from Divergent. We're factions. It kind of sucks, but it's true. It's very
Mm-hmm.
true. Like we're in these factions based on whatever our value systems are.
Mm-hmm.
We forget core values a lot of times, and that's why I'm like, politics is not a career I'd ever pursue. I believe way too much in the First and Second Amendment rights, and I need to speak and use my
Mm-hmm.
voice. So it's an interesting thing when I really think about, when I learned power dynamics, I thought, to me, I liken it to the continuum of healing or the continuum of violence. I took the 40-hour DB training, and so,
Mm-hmm.
like it all boils down to control and manipulation. One of the first things where it starts, and I'm like, okay, so it's unsafe to use computers these days. Things are going on. Everybody's looking for opportunities. It's driving me nuts. Oh my God. What am I going to do here? So, yeah, it's an interesting thing when I think about how do us healers, how do we women who are, doing everything we can to give back to the communities that we know are struggling, how do we use our voices while at the same time
Mm-hmm.
we're being told we're not good enough, you and your feminist this and that, and this hashtag, this thing that, and I'm like, okay. It's hard for me to believe that every man I've ever walked or crossed paths with actually believes that. I know there's plenty of men who happen to be feminists also.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so over the power dynamic that I tend to go back to relying on the most authentic spiritual connections that I know from my work that help me to remember who I am
Mm-hmm.
and what I do.
So shifting from, the concept of healer, and it sounds like you knew you were a healer on some level, and then it felt like maybe there was some imposter going on, and like, no, maybe I'm not a healer, maybe that's just too hard. And then coming out the other side of it, recognizing that you are in fact a healer and that you want to own that word and continue to spread that message.
Absolutely.
And I think you already talked a lot about the wounded parts of yourself, right? Like
Oh,
losing
yeah.
losing your brother. Like I can't. We have enough suicide in our family, but it's been members of my family that were further away from me, and
Mm-hmm.
I can only. Yeah, I remember seeing that on Facebook, and my heart just broke into a trillion pieces.
Yeah. Suicide is one of the things that I used to write poems about it when I was a teenager. And I think that's as far as I would ever allow it to go. But that doesn't mean I've never had a suicidal thought in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have these sort of thoughts of dread when I was younger. I was always worried. So when you talk about fear and
Yeah.
scarcity, I'm like, that's exactly, what I've already overcome in my life. I'm like, okay. I used to think things are so bad. Maybe it's just easier to be dead because this is like
Mm-hmm.
really scary. Like I'm getting bullied at
Mm-hmm.
school. There's violence in my house. There's so many things going on in my neighborhood, in my school. There's racism. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with all of that stuff. And I was like, man, maybe it'd be easier to be dead. And so for me
Yeah.
to work so hard on my own, just working through my own trauma in the way that I have, and to get to a place where, my baby brother, he was 8 years younger than me, and he was 32 last year. And so I'm like, he was so tired already.
Yeah.
Like he felt like he didn't have any other options.
Yep.
And thank God I got to speak to him just a couple of days before he died because I said, hey, you know what? Ironic about Wounded Healer. I said, listen, it's your time. You can't help other people. You can't worry about your girlfriend and the drama and all
Mm.
the things you're going through. Babe, you got to focus on you. You got to find healing for yourself.
Mm.
And he listened, but he listened with that same sort of pride and resistance and resentment that comes from being a younger brother to an older sister who doesn't play that shit.
Right.
so,
Right.
so he'd be like, yeah, and then mix that with
Mm-hmm.
religion. So he's like, yeah, in Jesus' name. And I'm like, okay, you can cool all that shit out right now because you don't have to do that with me. But
It's a little spiritual bypassing too, I
it
think.
just was a dark, dark place for him. And I think he allowed too many dark things to come in.
Yeah. So I gotta tell you, like the thought of my brother hurting himself is my number one fear. That is my number one fear in my life.
Mm,
And because suicide runs in the family, I'm not a crazy person for having that fear, right?
not at all. Not at
And
all.
I remember as a child, I can't remember if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I remember wanting to kill myself as a child too. I don't think I really knew what that meant, but I knew my mom's sister had killed herself right before I was born. And so I knew the emotional reaction that would happen. And I think because I was in so much pain and I didn't feel like anybody was recognizing my pain and validating it, I think I wanted to cause pain. And I'm not necessarily, I don't think that this was your brother's deal, but just kind of reflecting on my own story. Yeah. Like a
Yeah.
5-year-old should not, A, should not know what suicide is, and B, should not feel that way. So like obviously something was going on in that house that
hmm
I was reacting to, and I'm just glad I have moved beyond that place.
It's interesting that we're having a conversation about being wounded healers and understanding. Like, I think there's something so fascinating about being five and having that sort of plate where the way
Yeah.
you're looking at life in the world. It's so, to me, there's a maturity in that
Mm.
that I can
Mm-hmm.
totally connect to and identify. And it makes me feel like we are usually the ones who are called to this path and this work because
Yeah.
we're like born old souls, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Well, we're like feeling it when nobody else is. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I can tell you for sure, with my brother, I can definitely identify just with his personality. And I mean, he was, my baby too. I
Yeah.
basically helped raise him. There is something about the way his personality was and his overall feeling and his place in the family that
Mm-hmm.
definitely was always looking for validation and was
Mm-hmm.
someone who would inflict pain if he didn't feel like he received that.
Mm.
And so
Wow.
suicide right now is running rampant. And
God,
so
right?
right.
God.
It just really is
And
like,
just death, period. I feel like
yeah,
there's so
yep.
many, like all of my friends' parents are dying or people are committing suicide. I say this not in a derogatory way, but there's some sort of cleansing right now that I think is happening.
Hmm.
And I don't think that it's people that aren't supposed to be here, but I think that it's people who've done their work and
Hmm.
or were not going to be part of the awakening of consciousness to kind of take this planet to the next level. And again, that's not a derogatory thing. Like, I don't want anyone to think that I'm like, well, it's like the purge, like, fuck these people. We didn't need them
Yeah.
anyway.
No, you
But
don't. I mean, who has the right to even say that? But
right.
yeah, no, I get that. I feel like there's definitely a planetary, universal, spiritual shift happening in the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like there's shifts happening, and those are very
Mm-hmm.
real. And I feel like there are some people whose journey has come to completion, and then there's some who
Yeah.
don't have anything to offer to the next part for
Mm-hmm.
themselves or for anyone around them. And
Mm-hmm.
so it feels very much like I'm choosing not to be a part of this anymore. I can
Right.
definitely say with my brother, he was tired. He,
Right.
was probably someone who was an undiagnosed mental illness. And by the
Mm-hmm.
time we realized that it was just too late, and he was
Yeah.
already at the brink of, like he was already gone, already at the point of psychotic break.
Mm.
And then there was so much anger and so much unresolved pain that he just had been carrying.
Mm.
And like I said, he played with the dark side a lot. And I
Yeah.
think that all of that, and you couple that with exhaustion and then feeling probably rejected and just not good enough,
Yeah.
all of that compounds. And he refused treatment. When my mom wanted to
Mm.
take him, she asked me, I said, I think you should definitely take him. He refused treatment. And so at that point,
Mm.
what can you do? This is an adult who's saying, very angrily, I might add, no, I don't want that. That's not going to be for me. That's not for me. I don't want help.
Yeah.
So, you know what I'm saying? What can you
Yeah.
then do from that point? Hmm.
And that feels like from a spiritual place, there was a part of him who was opting out. And again, like,
Hmm.
I know that you're hearing what I'm saying, but I just kind of want to make sure that listeners understand that this is in no way a judgment. I think that for me, it's a way that I make sense of awful things happening is to give some sort of like reason to it that makes sense to me, that makes me feel better. And I don't care whether it's like right or wrong,
Hmm.
but it's a way for me to be at peace with, wonderful people leaving this earth in the way that I feel is maybe too early. But for them, clearly it was right on time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. I feel like we can only speak our own truth. And
Yeah.
I've had to come up with many different ways of dealing with this
Mm-hmm.
loss. And I mean, I
Yeah.
still am, where I knew him very well, but there was parts of him that I did not know, that I feel like I came to terms with in, a way that I'm still recovering from. But grief
Yeah.
takes a long while, and it's only been a year. So, I try
Yeah.
to give myself some grace in that instance.
And just speaking from the place of, grieving for my parents, well, really, honestly, most of it has been grieving for myself
Mm-hmm.
because there's been grief of, what I didn't get. It's been almost 4 years since my mom died, and her birthday is coming up, and I've been getting messages all over the place that I need to ask her for forgiveness.
Mm.
And I remember actually at the retreat in Mexico was the first time my heart embraced the idea of forgiving my parents and believing that I am who I am because of them, not in spite of them.
Mm.
And so now, 4 years later, I think it's time for me to ask for forgiveness for not being as graceful or kind as I could have been. And I've been very judgmental of my mom it's all out of grief. It's all out of this desire for her to have been someone that I needed her to be. but
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't her journey on this earth. Like, she has her own higher power and soul's path with that. And so, yeah, I don't really know what I'm going to do with that yet, but I see Susan on Thursday, so I'm going to ask her what I'm supposed to do.
Good. That's what she's there for. That's so awesome. First of all, I feel like we all grieve for selfish reasons, no matter what they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Grief is just, it's a very complex process, and it's
Yes.
definitely a process. And I mean, it takes time. And I had no idea because I mean, I lost my dad when I was 17, but like I
Mm.
did not shed a single tear at his funeral because I
Hmm.
was angry,
Yeah.
and I was
Yeah.
just like, you never gave me enough anyway, and how dare
Yeah.
you leave me this young? And so over time in counseling and therapy, I had to really work through that and also forgive him. So I've totally been there. I understand how hard that is. And I used to, write him letters. I mean, it's something
Yeah.
that in every stage of my life, I feel like I have to revisit it. You know what I mean? There's a
Yes.
return.
Yes.
There's
Mm-hmm.
growing older and saying, okay, so in this part of my life, I wish you had been here for this. And I have kids that he's never going to meet, grandkids, and he's
Mm-hmm.
never going to meet my husband or,
Yep.
see the woman I've become. So I think there's stages to all of that stuff. So, I think that's awesome to realize, I can grieve, but I can also realize it's for selfish reasons. And then the thing with suicide and my brother, it's been really surreal. Honestly, I'm still
Mm-hmm.
unpacking this and I really want to write about it. And this is what's so terrifying is that I did not grieve properly when he passed away originally.
Hmm.
I went right into caretaker mode.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in New York and I was getting ready for a show there. And then he took his life and I had to come home. And I
Mm.
happened to call just to check in on him and them while it was happening, which is
Mm.
again really freaky. I called and he's like in the bathroom and it's really,
Mm.
really
Shit.
tragic. And yeah, and so I'm screaming through the phone and the police are there and I'm telling my mom,
Oh
like,
my
get them,
God.
get him out of the bathroom. And just 2 days prior, I had said to my mom, you need to take him in for an assessment and let them see what's going on. There's something, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I said, but I feel like it's going to get violent. And I said that out of
Mm.
nowhere. And I was like, be careful, mom. I just have a feeling.
Yep.
And she said, okay. And so, even on the plane to New York, there was just this uneasiness. And so you could say on so many levels that I knew intuitively, I felt something was
Yeah.
really wrong and off, but I just didn't expect this to be the case. And so immediately I canceled my show. I flew home to be with my family and my mom and my brothers. And, this was also in the middle of a time where my business was really thriving. So I had a bunch of shows, and my solo exhibit at Chicago Mindful had just been the month before, like a couple of weeks
Mm-hmm.
before that, actually. And so I was supposed to do a workshop there,
Oh.
yeah, which was creativity is soul work. And if that was the day we ended up having his funeral. And
Jesus.
so I know. So it's just so many things, but I was there for everybody else in the family. And I didn't really take time for myself. Now, I knew that I wasn't okay. I knew that I was, really sad and super depressed all summer long.
Mm-hmm.
But there were so many transitionings happening. So
Mm-hmm.
our kids, so we're a blended family, so our oldest daughter graduated from high school, so we had to fly down for her graduation the week after the funeral, and then we come home, we've got all the teenagers here, I'm still trying to work, and like when I'm not numbing out, it's so I kind of delayed my own process.
Yeah.
And by December I got really, really sick. Started with high blood pressure and heart pain, and then
Mm.
chronic inflammation in my back. I have scoliosis with metal rods. So
Mm.
then insomnia hit. And
Oh.
that all led me into a psychotic break
Mm.
where it's almost as if I was on the other side of life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
And
do.
so I didn't, this was something that I was like, that can't happen to me. And I was in denial. And, my husband's like, you're not okay. You're not sleeping. I'm taking you to the hospital. So by January, I ended up spending a whole week in the behavioral health hospital, which, it was eye-opening because,
Yeah.
I mean, what a journey. And, that every doctor that I've seen since then, has said to me, you have to pause and give way to the fact that you're grieving, such a big loss. And then there's exhaustion, and then you have kids and a business and all the things. And so I've had to slow way down this year, which is just, I'm learning a lot about myself, but I didn't really know much about mental health, I should say, from a personal perspective. And I'm like, okay, now I feel like I've walked on the inside of what my brother's chemical imbalance was. And thank God I have the tools, you know what I mean, to apply. But that's not all.
And the willingness to ask for help. I mean,
that's what it is.
That's the big difference that I hear. And I mean, you and I have talked before about our frustrations with the mental health system and that it's not always as supportive, but it sounds like you took from it what you needed to create stabilization again.
The thing is, I'm sort of different in that I hang out with therapists. Like a lot of my friends are either psychotherapists, social workers, health and wellness practitioners, energy workers. So I've got like a whole gamut of amazing people in my life who I can always say, listen, I need help on this, who really helped me to come back to myself. So, I mean, I have been extremly fortunate, I have to say, because the system is broken and it's not an easy fix, but like, but there's work that we do for ourselves, and then we're also coming back to the table to see what we can then offer to other people. So yay us,
Yeah.
Seriously.
Well, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you think you want to share with listeners today?
Oh, yes. I am starting a soul revival wellness channel on YouTube.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So I love video, and I love to talk.
Hey.
So I would just invite people to, go look that up on YouTube and subscribe. I'm going to be doing weekly videos about all things, health and wellness, mental, emotional, and of course, lots of creativity and just some straight talk. So I'll be reading some poems and just talking about the journey. So
awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to have people follow me there as well.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure to get that link from you so we can post it with the airing of this podcast.
Awesome sauce.
Yeah. Well, Verse, thank you. Thank you, sister.
Oh, thank you. This is such a safe and cozy space. So, I mean, I absolutely adore you, and you're so badass. And I feel just honored to be in kinship with you. Seriously.
That feeling is mutual.
Yay.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with VersAnnette. Verse, thanks you so much for joining me on Conversations with a Wounded Healer. And as always, thanks to Andrea Klunder and Edwin Ruiz at the Creative Imposter Studios for their editing, Liam O'Donnell for the album art photo, and Ben Mueller for our theme music. For more information on VersAnnette, you can visit my website at www.headhearttherapy.com/podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on Spotify or iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, and you can connect with us on Facebook or Twitter. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time. Bye-bye.